All right, I think I'm gonna go ahead, settle up and get started then. Hi everyone, welcome to the Lights Camera podcasting event. You already know it's your boy Charles White, and if you don't know, um, I am the executive chair here on the university program board. And I would like to first and foremost thank you all for coming out to this podcasting event. I was very passionate. I was like, I really wanted this event to happen, and it's coming to fruition with you all coming in to attend. So thank you for that. A couple of announcements really quickly that I wanted to let everyone know of UPB's upcoming events, which are Mirth Week. You already know Mirth Week is like one of UPB's biggest thing here at UMSL that we help program. So, or that we program. So, um, we have a bunch. We have like three events from us that are going to be happening during Mirth Week, such as on the 20th, haha, 420. We have the improv class, and on the 21st, we have a drive-in movie. And on the 23rd, we are going to have the office trivia with the virtual comedy act. So I hope you all come to all three of those. Those are going to be really fun, really exciting. On top of that, we also ask that any questions you might have to please put them in the chat, and I will read them out to our guest speakers here today, which I'll get into in a sec to letting you know about. But put those in the chat, and then there will be enough time near the end for a Q&A session. So if you wanted to wait near the end to ask your questions, then you are more so to do so around that time. Anyway, I can't be the only one programming events here on the board. That would be a hard task. So there are people who do help me on the board. So I'm just going to let them also introduce themselves really quickly.
Hi, my name is Abby Holdinghausen, and I'm the marketing chair for UPB.
All right, now without further ado, I'm going to leave it on over to Jaya and Lauren, and who was part of the St. Louis Public Radio's podcasting group. So you lovely ladies, I'm leaving it on over to you.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Thanks for inviting us to speak. And thank you all for showing up. It's kind of funny talking to a whole group of people on Zoom. It's always weird. I see one of you has a microphone, so maybe we know some people are interested in podcasting. Another person's an owl over here. Another person, their avatar has a baby. So we have all kinds of people here. But I'm going to share my screen so that we can get into our presentation. And like Charles said, we really wanted to leave a lot of time for questions and answers just because it's just more personal. I don't know why everyone has shown up here today. We'll definitely cover the basics, but I definitely want to know from you, what you're interested in. Lauren, did I leave anything out before I move on?
No, it's fine. I'm ready.
All right, let's get into it. Okay, so we're from We Live Here podcast. It's a podcast about race and class produced by St. Louis Public Radio and PRX. We were started in the aftermath of the Ferguson uprising. Tim Lloyd and Emmanuel Berry were reporters at St. Louis Public Radio when they realized that the station had a little bit of a gap in coverage. A lot of stations and public media in general can always do better on covering issues of race and class, but what they wanted to do with this podcast was also center storytelling and also kind of do deep dives into different issues. So I'm Jialian Yang, my pronouns are she and they, and I am the co-host and lead producer of the podcast. So my background is basically, I got started in podcasting when I was a little bit demoralized. I was in between jobs and I was working like 6 different part-time and freelance jobs when I started a podcast with Treasure Shields Redmond. She's a local area poet. Her father is the poet laureate of East St. Louis, and she's a really wonderful person. We met through my past activism. And so we started a podcast that centered also voices of color, stories from people of color. We were interviewing activists, change makers, and also every episode that we had started with a poem. So then from there, I came on to work with St. Louis Public Radio on the We Live Here podcast, and that's how I met Lauren.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lauren Brown. I'm the co-host and producer for the We Live Here podcast. I attended the University of Missouri from 2015 to 2019, and this was my job for straight out of college. I started off as an associate producer where I just worked on, editing the audio, collecting tape, things of that nature. And then I got promoted to co-host and producer around 6 months after that. And so I've been here ever since.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth mentioning kind of our team dynamic. So clearly Lauren has a lot more background in audio. She's going to be the one who's like, why did you leave so much space in, this actuality or this cut? And she's going to also really well organized. She keeps us on track to produce episodes. For me, I have a background in social work and divinity. I have 2 master's degrees. And so I'm really kind of the person who's like, how can we research the heck out of this? How can we fact check it? How can we make sure that the listeners not only have great stories, but they also know the context for these stories? So again, I already kind of explained what We Live Here is. It's stories about race and class in St. Louis and beyond. So every episode has stories from just regular everyday people, but also perspectives from scholars and researchers and change makers. We're always trying to balance historical context with inspiration. We know that stories about race and class can get really deep, can be really serious, can be really painful sometimes, but we also don't want to leave our listeners with just that note. We know that for every story of pain, there's also a story about someone who's making a difference in their own community, who's pushing back against injustices. So that's why we're always highlighting community leaders working towards change.
Why we enjoy storytelling, this is one of my favorite parts actually, is valuing everyday people, going into those communities that are sometimes overlooked, underserved, and shining a light on those folks who are doing really good work, but a lot of people don't know about it, and to make sure that we shine a light on those stories, to help people understand delicate topics. Right now we're talking about environmental racism, and that deals with a lot of different things, from demolitions to housing to food deserts and things like that. So, stories kind of help people understand those really deep and intricate topics. It also puts a face and name to the issues we see. So when we talk about asthma rates and things like that, we spoke to a pastor of a church, and he talked about how his congregation, a lot of them have asthma, and he had to work, extra jobs to make sure they had emergency inhalers and things of that nature. So this is kind of why we enjoy storytelling.
Yeah, and to add to that, we have done several seasons now. We've done a season on the COVID-19 pandemic from a racial equity lens. We've also done a season about the uprising for Black lives, including and on top of the season that Lauren just mentioned, which is about environmental racism. And I bring that up to say that, for example, when we were talking about the uprising for Black lives, a lot of news media might look at, protests and actions, for example, and just say, oh, this is how many people showed up, or this is who was arrested. But the difference with our podcast and our method of storytelling is that we said, we wanted to see who's actually taking to the streets. A lot of people are taking to the streets. Who are they? Why are they doing it? What do they want? And then to situate that in history and how did we get here in the first place? We think that's a really unique thing that We Live Here does. So in terms of starting a podcast, this is what you all came here for. So this is very exciting. I think, I put a lot of questions here because I think when you start a podcast, you should ask yourself some questions. So, starting off, think about what stories or point of view you want to share. When I was doing the Who Raised You podcast, we also taught people how to do their own podcast. And it was really cool to hear all the different reasons why people want to start a podcast. So for example, Lauren's really passionate about music. I think if she did a music show, and in the past she has, that would be really cool. I wanted to know what songs are really meaningful to her, and when did she hear it? And when she hears those songs, what kind of feelings does she share, for example? Other people have other reasons. I've talked to someone who wanted to record the stories of their parents. So this person has a really unique story. They have two different parents who are queer, and they were getting older. So they wanted to record those stories before they pass so that they can have that for the next generation, and also so that they can learn some lessons from those people. I recently, just last week, a friend of mine reached out and said, hey, I want to get your perspective on how to start a podcast. I want to start a podcast about bugs. And I was like, whoa. And, he said he had all these questions, and I thought they were going to be questions about how to start a podcast in general. They were actually questions that he wanted to ask people who he's interviewing about insects. So the point of view and the stories really will determine what kind of podcast you do. So the other question I'd ask is, who's it for? Who's your audience? Who do you imagine will listen to your podcast? That will also change how you do your podcast. And for me, I think one of the best guiding principles is to think about what kind of podcast would you want to hear? Because if it's a podcast that you wish was out there in the world and isn't already out there in the world, first of all, it's going to be more original. It's going to be more unique, but also it's going to excite you. It's going to make you want to get up every day and go out and get those stories and put it together. Also, what format will meet your goals? So there's a lot of formats of podcasting. If you just go on Spotify or Google Podcasts or whatever platform you use, Stitcher, you can hear a lot of different podcasts. There's chatcasts. Those podcasts, people just talk to each other. That's probably one of the easiest podcasts to start, but it can also be really niche. Not everyone wants to hear you and your best friend talk, but some people might. For example, I know of a podcast that is, two Asian, they call themselves aunties, even though they might not be really aunties, but it's that feel. And they're teaching about sexuality. And they're doing that because they're like, oh, I didn't have any Asian people teaching me about sexuality when I was growing up. So think about that. We Live Here podcast is a narrative genre podcast. And what that means is that it's like a story. So when we have audio, we write in between the cuts, the interviews that we have. And it's like me and Lauren are the people who are guiding you through that story. We're guiding you through that history. It takes a lot more writing, but it's really easy for the listener to follow along. What that also means is that timeline is really important. We can't go from present day and then jump back to the past and jump back to present day. You have to really be thoughtful about, okay, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and resulting in this, so that's something you need to keep in mind for a narrative podcast. But also you can get more artistic. I don't know if that's the exact way to describe it, but the cool thing about podcasts is it's a new medium. There aren't really a lot of rules for podcasts. If you want to start a podcast where, someone, for example, is in the midst of a mystery and they're in a backyard and you hear all those sounds of the backyard, and then you want to take them into a house where they meet a monster or something, you can do all of those different things. You can do a lot of different things with podcasts, and just like with movies, just like with painting, just like with music, you can put your own spin on it. Finally, you can also just do an interview podcast. So let's say you are really interested in a topic, you want to geek out on a certain thing, and you just want to interview cool people who know a lot about it. That is a really good way to go. For example, the Under the Arch podcast is hosted by Kayla Reed of Action St. Louis and Blake Strode of Arch City Defenders. That is more of an interview podcast. Every single podcast features a different person and they're talking about a different topic. So finally, you just need a title, logo, and platform to start. The title of your podcast. And by logo, I mean actually a picture, just whatever is going to show up on the different platforms that you listen to. And then platform, there's different platforms out there. There's something called Libsyn that I think was one of the most commonly used platforms. Basically, it's a way to distribute your podcast to all the places that you hear podcasts. It uses something called an RSS feed. It's kind of basically different things pull from that feed. It's subscribed to it. You kind of can get in the weeds with that, but as a podcaster, you don't need to know all the technicalities of it. Back when I started the Who Raised You podcast, I used Podbean. You do have to pay for it. Certain things you do pay for. Anchor is a way. It's an app you can use for free if you're just starting out. So that's a lot of info. Now on to you, Lauren.
Okay, so now we want to talk about how we produce the We Live Here podcast. So first, we kind of brainstorm season ideas. So this is kind of the fun part of the job where we get to, sit down, we get a lot of sticky notes, we put things on the board, we move things around, and we kind of try to think about a really big topic that has kind of small topics included in that so that we can think of episode ideas. So for example, right now we're doing environmental racism. And so we kind of, thought about different things that we could discuss. Okay, could we discuss air pollution? Could we discuss reproductive justice? Could we discuss, food apartheid? And so that's kind of how we come up with those ideas. And then we have to find sources. So who should we talk to? We should talk to urban farmers. We should talk to, food justice organizers. We should talk to, different people that are, working on the ground, in the streets, cleaning up their neighborhood or trying to pass legislation and things like that. Then we also have to do research, which is, like Josh said, that's something that she always likes to really do. And I'm like, oh, research is so much, but just researching the historical context, how long have these neighborhoods been dealing with these issues? What have been done to try to combat these issues? And what are people doing now that's different than before? We also have to schedule interviews. So usually we'll do those in person. We would set up a scheduled time, date, and we would go meet them, whether it's in the field, out at a farm, or it could be, at their office or wherever they do their particular work. But since we're dealing with a pandemic, of course, we do those on Zoom. And then we record those on Zoom and we transcribe that audio using Trent, which is a transcribing platform. And also collecting field tape. So I use a Moran's audio recorder and Jai uses a Tascam. So those are two different recording things that you could use. Yep, that's a Tascam. Oh, I don't have the Moran's out, but it looks kind of similar. But we use those to collect field tape and make sure that we get all the sound that we need. We might use different mics, Omni mics, cardio mics, a shotgun mic to really get far audio, but but yeah, so we have to make sure that we always bring our kits. We have to carry, headphones, the recorder, the mic, batteries for the Marantz, because the Marantz doesn't have a backup battery, so I always have to bring batteries. So that's how we kind of produce the podcast, starting from, brainstorming all the way into, collecting that tape. And then somebody asked the transcription, it's Trent, Trint. But some people use like Otter or things like that.
Yeah, there's another service called Timmy. Like, people use all different services. So the important thing about transcripts also is that it can make your podcast more accessible. Right now we're running on a pretty small staff, so we really haven't had time to put all our transcripts out there. But when people do request it, like sometimes recently a professor requested a transcript and said, hey, I'm going to use it for my sociology class. And I was like, okay, let me clean it up and send it to you. So I also want to say on all of this, when you're first starting a podcast, it's also okay to do things on your cell phone. I know a lot of podcasters might frown upon that, but my thought is, start with your concept and just get going. I know a lot of people who are creative, they just stop themselves because they are like, oh, my concept is not perfect. I'm really afraid. How do I, begin? I'm just like, just start it. You can get better with the technology, with the skills over time. And, nowadays our cell phones have pretty decent audio. I'm not going to say we would use cell phone audio, but, in the pandemic, sometimes we have needed to do that. If someone is only calling them on the phone and I couldn't do it through Zoom, there's adjustments. So just start it. Don't worry about every little thing. So in terms of producing an episode, like Lauren said, there is a step to transcribing the audio. That is because we are that narrative genre podcast, and it's very important for us to make sure that the script is right. But other podcasts, if you're doing more of a chat cast and you're just going to improvise, you don't necessarily need to transcribe the audio. You're probably going to know, at 10 minutes, 15 seconds, we said something really funny, or, at this time, my dog started whining and I need to cut that out. It might be more obvious to you, the different pieces of editing that you might need to do. Lauren and I also write an outline. So this is where we're thinking about, the major topics we want to cover, what part of the story are we in, just so we know. It's very easy for you to get lost in all the tape that you've gathered. You can have hours and hours of tape just for a 1 hour or half an hour episode. That's something also for you to know at home when you're starting out. Likely you're going to be collecting a lot more than you want to put out there. So for example, if you want to get to know your grandma or your family's histories, you might just get hours and hours of tape. And that might be really important to you to keep. But in terms of putting something together that's cohesive, that's easy to listen afterwards, you do need to make some decisions about what stays and what goes. So Lauren and I also write a script. Again, this is because we're a narrative genre podcast. Not all podcasts need to have a script. And we split it up in 3 segments. So when you listen to We Live Here, you'll hear either sponsorship kind of ads or messages in between. So we're going to be like, hey, can you rate us on iTunes? That really helps us out. Or, interact with us on Facebook and Twitter, just for us to be able to talk to our audience. And then in terms of the sponsorship, that just supports the podcast. But if you're doing it at home, you don't necessarily need to split it up into those segments. But different podcasts, they will want to do different things in terms of breaks. So there is a podcast called The Black Guy Who Tips, and there's a lot of different types of podcasts that they do. They do a fun take on a news show. And so, they might throw in a fun special effects, or they might do a game that they just came up with. You could do that too and take a break from what your regular content is.
Mm-hmm. So from there, after we finish writing a script, we have to edit all the audio. So that could be, segment 1 through 3. So we have voicing tracks. So either Jao or myself, we would have to get in our closet since we're at home. Normally we would go to the studio, which is upstairs in the office, and just record there. But since we're at home, we have to get in the closet and kind of, pack in all of that sound so that it's not, you don't hear everything. So it's not echoey, things of that nature. So we have to record the voicing tracks, and then we also have to edit the quotes from each source that we have in those segments. So we do that using Adobe Audition software. Some people use Pro Tools or things like that, but we use Adobe Audition here. But we have to edit each segment. So the segments could be anywhere from like 10 minutes to 15 minutes. Sometimes segment 1 is a little bit shorter. It can be 5 minutes if we want it to be. So we have to edit each of those segments. So once we do that, we put it together in a multi-track session that's inside Adobe Audition, where we complete the whole episode from segment 1 to segment 3. So I have to make sure that I have the script and I'm able to look at the multi-track session so that I can pull each particular voicing track or actuality track, which is the quotes from the sources, and make sure that they're in a certain order. You have to add music. We like to have music as we intro the episode and kind of outro. Sometimes we do it throughout. I like to do it if we have like a really good, like deep quote where they say something really powerful. I like to have music kind of fade in when they start their quote. And then we kind of turn that into to our editor. So the editor kind of tells us, oh, you need to fix this here. Maybe you need to fade out here. Maybe you need to cut this quote shorter. It doesn't need to be that long. Different things that they might, catch that we didn't catch, or that they think will make the episode a little better. We have to do that. And then we have our episode and we upload to our PRX, which distributes it to all podcast platforms.
Yeah, and since this audience is a lot of college students, I do want to say that Pro Tools can be really helpful. I don't personally know how to use it, and I wish I did. When you look at different job descriptions for different things, let's say you do want to be a podcaster professionally, just look at what they require. You can also do a search now, even if you're not getting into the job market. It helps you to know, what skills you want to develop. But also, if you're doing this on your own and you just want to produce a podcast, back when I produced the Who Raised You podcast for myself and my friend Treasure, one of the very early lessons I learned was I wasn't good at editing. Now it's a different story. I have some more skills, but at the time I was like, I need to find someone who knows how to produce. And there might be a friend or a friend of a friend who enjoys producing, and you might have more of an enjoyment of the concept, and you can come together and make something happen. Mm-hmm. So in terms of obstacles, this is a really good question. Charles was like, what obstacles did you have when making the podcast? So one of the first ones I thought of was engaging our audience. So, it all depends, during a pandemic, it's hard to meet people. But the other part is, sometimes when you get into making a podcast, you don't always realize the impact that you're making on other people. There was one time when I had the Who Raised You podcast and I was at the YMCA, I had someone approach me and they're like, oh my gosh, hi. Oh, wait, you don't know me. I listened to your podcast. And I was like, I absolutely know who you are because I know you, who you are in the community, but also thank you. So what I'm saying is, like, when people listen to a podcast, it can feel kind of personal. It's like someone's voice is in your head. So that's helpful to know. Like, people do enjoy sometimes like getting the opportunity to connect with you if you've made a podcast that is meaningful to them. The other obstacle I'd say is also leaving tape on the floor. I've already kind of talked about this, but sometimes it can be hard. You get so much tape, people say some really cool things, but for the sake of making it easy on the listener to follow what you're saying, you do need to make some decisions about, removing some stuff. And maybe you can save it for, another bonus episode or something. Or some people like to listen to like the whole uncut podcast. On Being is a podcast that exists out there. There's episodes that are more polished, and then there's unedited episodes. And so maybe you listen to a more polished episode and you're like, oh, I love this person, I want to learn more about them. Then you can listen to the whole unedited piece.
Mm-hmm. And like Josh said about engaging our audience, sometimes we have different events that we like to put on that our audience can come to. But right now with the pandemic, some people are doing, like virtual events, but we've been doing a lot since we're such a small team right now. But I think that's one of the best parts about it, when you go out and you're just talking to someone and they're like, I heard your voice before. Do you do some type of show or a podcast or anything like that? And I'm like, oh yeah, I do the We Live Here podcast. And they're like, oh my God, that's my favorite show. And it's like, sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't think about it on a day to day, but like, it's really good to know that the work that you're creating and the work that you're putting out there is, affecting people in that way. So one of the other obstacles is getting quality field tape. Like I said, sometimes we go out to a farm, or it could be to an event or something like that. Recently we went to a farm, and it's a lot of sounds going on. It may be something from the street, it'd be cars, it's bugs, it's animals, it's people talking, somebody is talking to somebody else that's a few feet away. So to make sure we get quality field tape, I also collect ambi, so that's just like ambient sound. So I make sure that whenever I finish talking to someone in a particular spot, that I go back to that spot and get just the ambi of that area. Most of the time I get like a minute to a minute and a half of that ambient sound, so that when I go in to edit the audio, I can kind of fade that sound in before we get to that person who is talking in that particular spot, so that it doesn't kind of jump from, oh, hey, it's Lauren, it's We Live Here podcast. And then you hear, and then you hear bugs and somebody talking, you're like, how did they get there? So we have to make sure we put that in the script and make sure that we use that ambient sound. Then one of the other obstacles, like Josh said earlier on, is balancing historical context with storytelling. It's a lot of research, it's a lot of data. Specifically with the asthma episode, I had to put in a lot of data as far as St. Louis City and St. Louis County and how it compares to the rest of the country. And it's kind of hard to kind of put that in, but also tell a person's particular story. So that's kind of one of the obstacles that we have. And so we kind of check each other to make sure that it's cohesive, that it makes sense, and that, we're really doing justice for the source.
And I want to add something about the ambient sound. So that helps people like feel where you are and like imagine themselves, because you're not like in a movie where you can just like show like pictures. So you want to give them a sense of where you are. The other thing about that if you aren't used to doing audio work that you might not know is that even in a room there's ambient sound. So if you're interviewing, let's say, a doctor in a doctor's office, like there's going to be a hum of the HVAC system, or maybe even very far in the background, there might be some beeping or something. You want to get a little bit of that. So like Lauren said, it's not just such an abrupt jump into when you're actually in the location from when you're narrating. I just wanted to add those things. So in terms of successes, you're starting this one, Lauren, not me.
In terms of successes, we're a resource. I can't even get it out. A resource for community educators and change makers. Part of our COVID season was actually added to a med playlist with a lot of doctors and nurses and people on the front line that want to hear stories about what's going on in the community. Also holding people in power accountable when a lot of these things are happening in these neighborhoods, as far as, demolitions. We were able to go and talk to someone about that, and it kind of helped them with their situation. Someone came out to kind of test their soil, things that they were having issues with. And so, being able to hold those people in power accountable so that some change can possibly come from a particular episode. We don't always know if that's going to happen, but it's great when it does.
Yeah, and like Lauren said, it's really cool to be able to contribute to a national dialogue about race consistently on different, media outlets and different, we'll make it to different lists about these are the podcasts you need to listen to about race. I think it's because people are curious about St. Louis. When the podcast first started, actually a lot of people who were listening to it were from outside of St. Louis. I think right now the audience is changing and shifting a little bit, but people are still curious about it because they know that there's such deep, long stories of race and how people have dealt with racism here, and also how people have made things better for their communities. So it's cool to be able to uplift those stories from St. Louis and tell people, you can learn from the past and you don't have to keep making the same mistakes from before. You don't have to keep perpetuating structural and systemic racism. But the other part of it is also inspiring empathy and helping people know that they're not alone. So that's the part where Lauren was saying, when we focus on the stories of everyday people, we want to let people know, if they're working for change, they're not the only people who are doing that. There are other people who are in this work for a long time, who have gone through different things that you can learn from. But also, if you're going through a difficult situation, when you feel like all the odds are stacked against you, you're not the only person who's gone through that. And there's also a context for which, these situations and systems exist. And our hope, as reporters, as journalists, we can't really say, you must do this. That's not our role. But our hope is to be a resource. A lot of educators like to use our podcast and teach their students about history and about how society is structured. So that's an impact that we like to make. But the other cool impact too is just people looking at us and seeing, okay, these people can be a voice about these issues and also make a podcast. When Lauren was producing and hosting the Black at Mizzou documentary, she got a lot of comments from people saying, you are a role model for me in terms of Black journalists too. You make it seem possible for me to also speak out about certain things. So this is our last slide. We wanted to show you just all the pictures of, well, not all of them, but a sampling of pictures of people that we've interviewed, some pictures of us in the field. This is me holding a microphone with a scarf. FYI, a lot of microphones don't need you to do that. I'm silly and I thought there was too much wind. But yeah, get to know your tech. Anyway, so we also wanted to play for you a trailer that we made in the past. Lauren, do you want to tell them about this trailer and the story of this?
Yeah. So Ja mentioned this earlier. I worked as a freelancer with American Public Media on an hour-long documentary about racial climate on college campuses. Like I said earlier, I attended the University of Missouri during the 2015 uprising. And so we kind of went back, told that story, 5 years later, how it affected me, how it affected other students on campus. And we were supposed to work with them on a season called Black on Campus, where we would go to different, SLU. So we would talk to different people about different things that Black students face on campus. But the pandemic hit. And so we kind of pivoted to COVID coverage because it was such a big thing that we couldn't just, bypass it. So we have a trailer for that particular season that we didn't actually put out. But I just think that it's a really good trailer. It really speaks to the things that Black students face, and we wanted to share it with you all.
Also, Lauren did a really good job of producing it and it sounds great. So we're very proud of it. All right, whenever you're ready. 3, 2, 1.
I wake up every morning to go and learn at an institution built by slaves, built by people who looked like me.
Maybe I've code switched so much my whole life that it's just part of what I do.
Because there's not too many representations of you, so it's almost like it's a magnifying glass on you.
What's good, y'all? It's Lauren
and Jalian with We Live Here podcast.
We're about to start dropping episodes for our brand new season.
And this time, we're talking about what it means to be Black on campus.
From who built the first university west of the Mississippi?
All we knew were the first names of the first 6 enslaved people who were brought here, and that was it.
To what it's like to be the first in the family to go to college.
You're like, it's supposed to be free. I'm like, no, it's not. Maybe in your time, not mine.
And how one group is helping Black students navigate educational spaces.
So it's not a one stamp all, like this is Black, this is this. But at the same time, you know, it's like recognizing the hoops and obstacle courses that so many of us have gone through. And then now let's co-create space, more space, bigger space.
And we've made some new friends. We're working with Educate, a podcast from American Public Media that explores stories about education and opportunity across the country.
We'll be back with all new episodes in just 2 weeks.
From St. Louis Public Radio and PRX, this is We Live Here, a show for people somewhere on the woke spectrum.
And now we can do questions. Charles, are you gonna filter those for us?
Yes, I can do that. So that was the end of the presentation, y'all. It was great, by the way. So now you can start asking your questions. If you don't want to like speak, you can just ask them in the chat, or if you want to speak, you can just like unmute yourself and try to like ask questions, and we'll just see how it goes from there. I have questions, but I want to see if anyone else has any questions first before I, oh, we got a raised hand. Malik, go ahead.
Hello, y'all. Can y'all hear me?
I can hear you, yep.
Cool. I'm just curious as to like, I guess with Audition, I haven't used Adobe Audition before, and I'm wondering if like, how would a Zoom presentation work if you were using like a platform like Audition? Like if you were doing a podcast on Zoom, and then also like in terms of audio quality, I guess, like how would you let people know like, hey, if you can find a quiet space, like, is there something you tell people before that? So that's it.
Yes, so when we interview folks on Zoom, we kind of ask them to introduce themselves first so that we can kind of hear the sound in the area that they're in. Sometimes we have to tell them, you know, can you turn down the TV, or can if they have kids or something, like, is it a way for you to go into a different area? So we kind of do it like that, just kind of ask and see if they can quiet down the area or move to a different space. Sometimes we have to do over the phone interviews if the internet connection or something doesn't work, but Zoom actually downloads it as a MP4, and so we have to convert it into a WAV file or MP3 file and then upload it to Adobe Audition, and that's how we edit the audio. If that answers, if Jai has something else to add.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is the social aspect of it. So back when I did my own podcast, I was kind of nervous about telling people about the audio quality. I just like didn't want to interrupt the flow of the interview or make people feel uncomfortable. Now I'm like, no, absolutely, you know, broach that subject early, then you don't have to worry about the audio after. Because once the audio is done, it's baked in. Like some people think, oh, I'm going to edit it out later. No, like just try to get as good an audio at first as possible. So if people are doing, you know, a laptop, for example, you know, tell them to like locate where the microphone is. I mean, you don't have to. A lot of people are doing Zoom nowadays, so they might understand. But one thing that Lauren and I do every time is just say, you know, could you introduce yourself, you know, your name, your pronouns, etc. Or we ask them, what did you have for breakfast? Then you just have a little bit of a conversation. They get a little bit less nervous, and then you can hear and pay attention to how they're sounding. So if they're really super echoey in a room, you could ask them like, you know, do you have a jacket or a blanket that you can throw over yourself? Don't worry about looking silly type of thing. Or figure out their mic situation. With Zoom also, sometimes people's laptops aren't super up to date. One time that happened with me and I asked them to call a number. So the Zoom invite has a phone number that you could call into. And so if you're on your computer, you can record from your computer while they're calling in on the phone. And typically, I think when they're on the phone, they'll hold it better to their mouth and you might get an okay sound otherwise. But generally, I do default to the computer. People are just kind of more comfortable that way and sounds fine usually.
Mhm.
Cool. We have 2 raised hands, so I'm gonna let David. I think I saw his hand first, and then Marian will be next.
Thanks, guys. Guys, thanks so much for doing this. This is a lot of fun, and I work over in the College of Ed. I'm the recruitment coordinator. Trying to get a podcast started, but unlike you guys who have a pretty good background in multimedia and everything before you started this podcast, I've never done this before, so I'm learning on the fly. I've dabbled in a lot of little things, but I certainly don't have the level of knowledge that you guys had when you already had when you started your podcast. So I'm just curious if you have any suggestions for somebody like me on where to get started. I've researched and I kind of know all the ins and outs of what's involved, and that's kind of made it even more daunting to get started because there's so much involved. What would you suggest for somebody like me to just get started? And I feel like if I can get started, it's all going to slowly kind of fall in place, but it's just that first step that I kind of can't get past.
Yeah, I can speak to this one since I kind of started a podcast on my own. The Anchor app, I've just like heard really great things about it. It's very intuitive and easy to use. So if you're just wanting to get started, I would say go with that. But also I would say think about like why you're doing it. So if you're doing it more for a professional capacity, then you do want to think about that. And so because of thinking about making sure that my podcast was out there and just not wanting to think about it. That's why I subscribe to Podbean. This is not an advertisement to Podbean. I just knew about it because I went to a church once and that's what they used for their sermons. And so it was pretty easy to use, but there's probably a lot of services out there like that. And so then when you do that, all you have to worry about is the concept of your podcast, you know, who are you talking to, making sure that you're recording it and just making that happen and then uploading that. You know, it also depends, you know, if this is something really important to you and you just want the podcast out there and you don't want to think about production at all, consider maybe hiring. You know, if you have a budget for that, you could support, you know, a young up and coming, you know, producer by paying them to make it happen. And then they can put that on their resume. You know, since you're in a college setting, that could be something really good too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just say, add on to what Josh said. It's all about just starting it. As far as Anchor, I think Anchor is a really good platform. You know what she talked about, how I love music. I was thinking about starting a music podcast, and I looked at Anchor first, and it was very quick and easy. You just needed your title, your logo, your description, and then they kind of help you get ads and sponsors and things like that for your podcast, so you can kind of start earning money if that's what you want to do. But it's all about just coming up with the ideas and having the idea down. I think when I first thought about the podcast, I was like, okay, I got the title. Let me think of some episode ideas. And so I just went into Google Drive. I made a bunch of folders and I was like, oh, okay. And in about an hour, I had, you know, like 10 to 12 episode ideas. And then you can kind of, you know, go off that, you know, record a couple of them and see which one sounds the best, which one works, and just kind of just starting it and getting your feet wet and just seeing, you know, you can learn as you go. And, you know, YouTube is a resource for Audition. You can find a lot of, you know, audio clips and how to use Audition on YouTube. And so that's kind of how I learned really, besides, you know, college, but also just learning on your own is a lot that you have to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, guys. That's great. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Marian, you also had a question?
Yes, I do. Good afternoon, everyone. I can't thank you all enough for providing this amazing content. I do listen to We Live Here, and I absolutely love the show. I've been thinking about doing a podcast for a number of years. David, I really appreciate your question because like you, I am, you know, I'm knowledgeable about what I want my content to be, and I'm knowledgeable about different platforms, things of that nature, but I don't know the first part about getting started from a practical standpoint. And one of the questions that I have, I'm a doctoral of nursing student here at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. One of the questions that I have is, what type of equipment would you consider to be satisfactory equipment for beginners like myself? Not trying to go out and spend a whole bunch, but because I'm brand new, I'm just getting my feet wet, I will likely have to have someone do production, things of that nature for me on the technical piece. But I do want to get started and just need to know what's the best equipment to get started with.
Yeah, that's a good question. Lauren, do you have a thought?
Yeah. So I think it just depends on what type of show you want to have. So as far as when I wanted to do a music show, I got a couple of USB mics that I can plug into my laptop, and then I can just record straight onto Adobe Audition. So you would have to pay for Adobe Audition, which costs a pretty penny, but it's not like you would use it for recording and editing. So it comes out to, being a good price. And you'll also get, like Premiere, you can get other things where if you want to add video to it. So I got a couple of like USB mics that I can plug into the laptop. And if it's just me and another person, then I have those two mics that we'll talk into, which will record straight onto the laptop. But if you want to go out in the field, I use a Marantz. That was the first thing that I was introduced to. It's kind of quick and easy. Like I said, you need batteries because it doesn't have a backup battery to it. But I think the Marantz is kind of quick and easy to understand. Just making sure that you have all the cables, plugging it in, and making sure that you check the sound and the levels. But it's a really easy kind of recorder to use. But also YouTube has those tutorials as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm thinking of a narrative podcast. It would just be me kind of starting out. So I was just looking for the bare bones, and it sounds like a USB mic might be a good place to start. Thank you.
Ja, I didn't know if you had a different recorder that you used first.
Yeah, I was just looking it up. I was looking up the receipt that because I forgot the name of it. But well, my first thought was I actually went to a conference for podcasting.
Zoom.
Like when I yeah.
A Zoom recorder.
Yeah. So before I get to that, so I went to this podcasting conference when I was starting out, just starting my own podcast, and someone was doing a presentation kind of similar to this, and they were saying, I absolutely recommend that you start with your cell phone, because a lot of people, what they do is go out immediately, spend a lot of money, like $200, and then the equipment just sits there while they're like racked with anxiety and perfectionism about like getting it perfectly right. And they're like,
that would be me.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't do that. Like start with your cell phone, don't worry about the quality of the audio, and just do whatever it takes just to start, just to make that content. And then as you get going, and then as it keeps happening and you're, doing that creative process, like you can upgrade your equipment as you keep going. So that is one way to do it. And for me, later on when I had a need to, I wanted to go out into, different places, meet people where they were at, for example, meet an artist in their studio. I bought a Zoom microphone. So it's like a Zoom H5, I believe is what it's called. Zoom H5 handy recorder. So that's what I got. And you don't need to have like a separate mic for that. There's a built-in mic in there, and I found it pretty easy to use. But like Lauren said, at the station, we either use a Marantz, which doesn't have a backup battery, but it is pretty easy to use, and a Tascam, which does have a backup battery. It's much more advanced. It's much more like now kind of in terms of technology. It's also pretty simple to use too. And generally, if you're not using the unit mic, you would just do a cable plus another mic. And then, basically what you need to know is like the closer you are to your mouth, the better the sound is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Zoom recorder. I forgot to say that was the first one I had. Then I had a Marantz.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Questions, Marion? Yes. Next in the chat, we have Mark. I think I'm saying that right. They asked, how do you promote your podcast or obtain new followers?
That's a good question. So we're in a unique situation because we're at a station. We do have a marketing department, but we also do social media. I think the most of our emphasis is on social media. That's where people are nowadays. I think we wish we could promote it better, honestly. And that also relates to kind of the events and engaging your audience. But in terms of like at home, if you're starting out your own podcast, I'd start with like the people you love, your friends and your family, and people who are like team you. Like they're going to support whatever you make. And that's the best, because then they have their own circles. And once they know what you're making, like, don't be afraid to show them what you're making, even if it's not perfect. Then they'll be able to share that with other people.
That's good. Thank you for that, because I needed that answer too myself. Sabrina asks, if you're looking to get paid to podcast, how long would one need to wait to earn money? Malik had already answered that there was a place called Anchor FM where you can earn money, but I'm not sure if you both knew of any other places where someone can earn money, or a rough estimate of how long you think it could take for someone to earn money doing like podcasting.
Yeah, Anchor was something that we spoke about a little bit earlier. They kind of help you get ads. So they'll send you like let's say it's some company or something small, and you kind of write up just a quick like 30-second or 15-second thing that you kind of add into your show, and then you kind of accumulate money there. But I'm not specifically sure how fast you're able to do that. I don't know if John knows, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know for sure too, but I do want to say it's kind of hard. I don't really want to say this, but the podcasting market is really, really crowded. Like it's super, super duper crowded. And it's hard. It's really hard. So I'd say if you are serious about making money off of it, you do need to have a very unique, specific concept. You need to be very clear about your audience and being like, how is it that you're able to reach your audience in a way that very few people can? Or if you're able to reach an audience that's similar to other people, figure out like everything about them, like what they're passionate about, what their lifestyle's like, what things they like to buy, things they like to watch. That's the type of stuff that you need to be thinking about. I think two ways about it. One is like, I do think that if you want to start a podcast, do it for the love of it. Don't do it to make money, because if you want to do it to make money, unfortunately, I want to say like most of the time you're going to be disappointed because it is such a crowded market. That said, it's not impossible to make money off of it. And there's multiple ways to do that. One is you could do it for a living. And me and Lauren, I wouldn't say that we're making money off of it. I'm saying we're working in the podcast field. That's a little bit different. And then the other part of it is if you're actually making money off of it, that's really through sponsorships. I'd say the bulk of it is going to be sponsorships. It's not going to be because you're uploading to Anchor or Podbean and getting like little cents through advertisements. It's going to be because someone hears your podcast and it's about bugs, and like there's someone who makes like bug homes or, like bug enthusiast clothing and bug, adventures. And then they want to pay you to say, I'm into Bug Co. That is my source for bug adventures, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's all about the promotion, and you got to have other things going on with the podcast, whether that's merchandise or whether it's, going out to different events and kind of learning more about the podcast industry. Like there's a lot of fellowships or different virtual events or programs that you can join that'll help. And then also just going into those places and spaces where a lot of people have different podcast events, and, making sure you have your logo, making sure you can put that in different places, and kind of, getting your audience, more people to know what your podcast is, so that way, it can reach more people.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'd add to that is related to that, like it's all about building a community if you want to go that route. So like I said, Black Guy Who Tips, he has like a lot of like listeners and a lot of like people who love the podcast. If you build a community that loves you and loves, your personality and what you bring to them, then they're going to support what you do. You could use Patreon, you could use a newsletter, you could use merch, all those things.
Thank you. Malik asks, is there a way to connect with other podcasters around St. Louis?
Yeah, I think I'd say so. I don't know off the top of my head, like certain names, but there's definitely probably like groups of podcasters. I think we know more about like the journalist associations and like public media groups. Lauren, do you have any ideas?
I think it's, who did we work with? What was it? AIGA, like they have a podcast, and kind of just working with other folks, it kind of helps with, if you want to do like sponsorships and ads, you can get a quick, a sponsorship tag on their show and they can put one on your show. But it's all about building connections and like actually going out and networking and going to those places. So if you see a podcast that you like, then you can go to their events. You can kind of talk to those people, get introduced to those folks, and then you can build a relationship from there. And then hopefully something comes from that.
Yeah. So the nice thing about St. Louis, and some people might say it's the nice thing, but it's kind of like in a way a small town. So it's not going to be too hard if you want to like look up STL podcasts. The one that Lauren was talking about is called STL by Design, and that's by AIGA, which is like a design kind of association. There's also Jocon Media, JOCON Media. Joe Jones has been doing a lot of podcasts himself through there. So yeah, you could just go on the search for it and reach out to people. Chances are they're at home in their closets and they would love to meet you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, also Farfetched, they do podcasts too. So they also help. They're an independent record collective that also helps people make podcasts.
Woo. Drew asks, as a hobby, not trying to make money, how much time do you think one would have to dedicate to podcasting to experience success?
Lauren, do you want to start or should I tackle this?
It would be a lot of time. I don't know how to like have a specific number or anything, but it would be a lot of time. But also, before I got this job and I was thinking about, starting my own podcast before I got into the field, I was dedicating a lot of time to it because that's all that I had at the moment. And so I was dedicating so much time to it and, kind of figuring it out. But if you have, like, let's say you have a job that you have to do, Monday through Friday, maybe you can do it on the weekends. Maybe you can do it when you get off. Maybe you can do it when you have, vacation days or when you have time off or things like that. But it's a lot of time.
Well, I mean, it is 3:46, so I want to be mindful of that. But the very first thing that popped into my mind is success is whatever you say it is. So don't be all like, oh my God, I don't have anyone listening. Like, if your definition of success is that you made the podcast and like you have something to listen to about something that's so cool, or like gives you a cool auditory experience, or it's about like something that you're so passionate about and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to dive into the history about cheese. Like, that's great. You succeeded. Yay. Mm-hmm. Or if it's just your friends and families listening and they're like, oh my gosh, like, I didn't know you were so passionate about this. It's so cool to hear your voice, like talk about this, story or this interest of yours. That's great. That's success too. So don't tie yourself to like whatever ideas of success are out there. Plus, if you start small, like you can always build on that.
Yeah.
All right. We have 2 more questions left, so we got like 2 more minutes left. So I'm gonna try to say these really fast so you can get the chance to answer both of them. Autumn asks, how long did it take to build your audience?
This podcast has been in several years in the making, so and I think it's still developing.
Yeah, I think the audience changes. Like Josh said, 2 other individuals started the podcast and it's kind of went through different hosts. So I think the audience is changing, especially with John and I being younger, being from different backgrounds, different things like that. And so I think it's constantly changing.
All right, thank you. And I want to know if I'm saying this right. Shia, is that right? Shia?
Shay, thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Well, since you're off, like, do you want to ask the question?
Yeah, sure. So I have grant funding for a podcast. And I was interested in what you said about hiring a producer. So how could I go about doing that? And I would especially love to support someone who's up and coming, or an UMSL student or a college student, or what's your advice?
Yeah, well, for me, I would say, I know when I was in school, when I was at Mizzou, it was a lot of things that we would hear about from, let's say you all have a radio station or a TV station on campus. They would have like a job board that you can post to. I'm also in a lot of Facebook groups that put jobs in there, but it's a lot of students that need those types of things to get their feet wet in the field. So I think it would be easy for you to find someone, especially journalism students. I just helped someone that I went to college with get a freelancing gig with American Public Media that I actually couldn't take at the time. And so it's kind of just networking and finding those groups and those places where those students are and kind of posting the job there. But it's a lot of people that need those jobs, especially since the pandemic. A lot of journalists have lost their jobs, and so a lot of people are willing to do freelance producing work. So you'll be able to find someone.
And yeah, I think that's all we got. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. That's all we have. Thank you so much, Jalia, and Lauren. I said it way too fast. Thank you for your wisdom and everything that you had said to us today in the presentation. It was really helpful to me, and I hope it was really helpful to anyone else who was really interested in it. Yeah, that's all we have. You're all free to go.
Charles, could you send along our contact information? A couple of people asked for it in the chat, but if you,
I got
or
it.
we could say it out. I don't know.
Yeah, I have it. I gotta pull it up from my email.
We live here at stlpublicradio.org works, right, Lauren?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
We live here at stlpublicradio.org.
Yes, or like our specific emails.
Yeah.
Mine is lbrown@stlpublicradio.org.
Yeah, mine is J as in jaw, YANG as in yin and yang at stlpublicradio.org. We're very nice people, accessible. We'll not answer all your calls at all hours, but we'll get to you.
Thank you.
Do you still want me to put it in the chat?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Just in case I said it too fast. I talk fast sometimes.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Oh, that was mine.
Not the numbers.
The wrong thing anyway. Oh no,
emails.
You didn't want the okay, emails. I got you.
I could type it if that makes it easier.
Yeah, that might help because I'm going back and forth for my email.
I'm doing yours, Ja.
Okay.
We can always follow up with anybody who sends us an email. So we will let you go. Thank you both so much for
Thank
your
you
help today.
All right. Bye.